February 23, 1945. Somewhere along the Roer River Valley in western Germany, a Sherman tank sat motionless among the skeletal remains of a bombed-out orchard. Inside the turret, Corporal James "Jimmy" Rothwell pressed his forehead against the rubber padding of his gunner's periscope. His breath came slow and measured. The air inside tasted of oil, sweat, and cold metal. Through the narrow vision slit, he watched the road, a muddy ribbon cutting through dead winter fields. His right hand rested on the traverse control. His left hovered near the firing trigger. Behind him, the tank commander, Lieutenant William Kowalski, crouched in the turret hatch, binoculars raised. "8 Panzers," Kowalski whispered, his voice barely audible over the idle rumble of the Sherman's engine. "Mark IV and Panther mix. Range 1,200 yards and closing." Rothwell didn't respond. His jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed to fire now, while the range was comfortable, but he held. The barrel of his 76mm gun was cold. Not a single round fired that morning, and that cold barrel, according to everything he'd learned, would give him one perfect shot. One chance to get it right before everything went to hell. The winter of 1945 marked a desperate turning point along Germany's western frontier. After the failed Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last gamble, known as the Battle of the Bulge, the Wehrmacht was bleeding divisions it could never replace. By mid-February, American and British forces were pressing toward the Rhine, the final natural barrier protecting the German heartland. Operation Grenade, the Allied push across the Roer River, had begun on February 23rd. It was a grinding, brutal advance through flooded terrain and fortified villages. The Germans defended every meter with fanatic determination. They knew what lay beyond the Rhine: surrender or annihilation. Tank warfare by early 1945 had evolved into a lethal chess game of positioning and patience. The open-field blitzkrieg days were over. Now armor fought in close terrain, villages, forests, river valleys, where a single well-placed gun could destroy an entire column. American tank doctrine had learned hard lessons since Normandy. The Sherman, once dismissed as a Ronson lighter by its own crews, had been upgraded. The M4A3E8 Easy 8 variant mounted a high-velocity 76mm gun capable of penetrating most German armor at reasonable range, but the Panther and Tiger still outclassed it in frontal armor and gun power. American crews survived through numbers, coordination, and, increasingly, through tactical cunning. The Roer Valley presented unique challenges. Flat, open farmland offered excellent fields of fire, but zero cover. Villages were death traps. Roads became kill zones. German armor, starved of fuel and replacements, operated in small, aggressive battle groups. They used terrain masterfully, hitting supply columns and isolated units before vanishing into the countryside. American tank commanders adapted. They learned ambush tactics from their enemies. They positioned their Shermans in orchards, behind hedgerows, inside ruined barns, anywhere that concealed their silhouette while offering clear firing lanes. Rothwell's crew belonged to Company C, 33rd Armored Regiment, 3rd Armored Division, the Spearhead Division. They'd fought from Normandy through the Bulge, losing 2 Shermans and replacing half their original crew. Rothwell himself had joined in October 1944, a replacement gunner trained at Fort Knox. He was 22 years old, from Pittsburgh, the son of a steel worker. Before the war, he'd worked in his father's machine shop, learning precision measurement and patience. Those skills translated surprisingly well to gunnery. His instructors at Knox noticed his cold discipline under pressure. He didn't rush. He calculated. Every shot mattered because ammunition cost lives, and missed shots revealed position. Lieutenant Kowalski trusted Rothwell more than any gunner he'd commanded. The two had developed an unspoken language during months of combat. A tap on the shoulder meant traverse left. 2 taps, hold fire. A squeeze meant ready to fire on command. Kowalski had learned that Rothwell could judge range by eye within 50 yards. He understood bullet drop, wind drift, and target leading instinctively. Most importantly, Rothwell believed in the cold barrel doctrine. American tankers were taught a critical principle at gunnery school. Your first shot from a cold barrel is your most accurate. Once you start firing, heat expands the metal. Tolerances shift microscopically. Subsequent shots wander. Not much, but enough to matter at long range. A patient gunner with a cold barrel could achieve precision that rapid fire never would. The morning of February 23rd began with intelligence that changed everything. A reconnaissance patrol reported German armor moving north along the secondary roads east of the Roer. At least 8 tanks, possibly more, heading toward the river crossings the Americans had just secured. If those panzers reached the bridges, they could cut off 2 entire infantry battalions. Company C received orders to establish blocking positions along the likely approach routes. Kowalski's Sherman, designated C7, drew the orchard position, a small grove of apple trees 300 yards from the main road. It was a gambler's spot. Perfect fields of fire, but isolated. No support within 1,000 yards. If things went wrong, they'd be alone. The crew spent 2 hours preparing. Driver Harold Jensen backed the Sherman between 2 thick tree trunks, angling the hull for maximum frontal protection. Loader Bobby Martinez stacked armor-piercing rounds within easy reach, organizing them by type. M62 for standard penetration, M93 tungsten core for the heaviest targets. Bow gunner Eddie Diaz cleared firing lanes through the lower branches. Kowalski studied the terrain through binoculars, memorizing every depression and fold in the ground. Rothwell calibrated his sights, checking parallax and making minute adjustments to the reticle. He ran his hand along the gun tube. Stone cold. Perfect. By 0900 hours, they were ready. The Sherman's engine idled at bare minimum, just enough to keep systems warm without announcing their presence. Radio silence was absolute. Kowalski listened on the company net through his headset, but transmitted nothing. The sun climbed slowly through gray winter clouds. The temperature hovered just above freezing. Mud from the previous night's rain made the fields impassable to wheeled vehicles, but tracked armor could manage. Rothwell waited, eye pressed to his periscope, watching the road that stretched empty toward the eastern horizon. At 10:47 hours, Kowalski stiffened. Through his binoculars, he'd spotted movement, dust rising 3 kilometers out, barely visible against the pale sky. He keyed the intercom once, alert signal. Rothwell's heart rate quickened, but his breathing remained steady. He adjusted his seat height, checked his sight picture one final time, and placed both hands on the controls. The traverse felt smooth. The elevation wheel turned without resistance. Everything mechanical was perfect. Now it was just patience and precision. The German column appeared gradually, materializing from the morning haze like steel ghosts. Kowalski counted them off silently. 2 Panzer IVs in front, moving fast, turrets traversed to cover the flanks. Behind them, 3 Panthers, the real threat, advancing in staggered formation. Then, 2 more Panzer IVs bringing up the rear, plus a command variant with extra antennas. 8 tanks total, exactly as reported. They were moving with confidence, almost arrogance, apparently unaware that American armor had penetrated this far east. Their formation suggested they expected resistance ahead, not from the flanks. They weren't buttoned up tight. Hatches were open. Commanders stood in their cupolas, scanning forward. Rothwell tracked the lead Panzer IV through his sight. Range, 1,400 yards and closing. Easy shot at this distance, but not perfect. He wanted 800 yards, maybe 700. Close enough that even the Sherman's 76mm couldn't miss, far enough to engage the entire column before they could maneuver effectively. His finger rested outside the trigger guard. The cold barrel waited. Kowalski tapped his shoulder twice. "Hold fire." Rothwell exhaled slowly. The Panzers rolled closer. 1,300 yards. 1,200. He could see individual track links now, the mud caked on their road wheels. The lead tank's commander was lighting a cigarette. 1,100 yards. The Panther's long 75mm guns swept the horizon but never settled on the orchard. Rothwell's mind operated in a strange dual state, hyper-aware, yet disconnected. His hands were steady, but his pulse hammered in his ears. This wasn't his first engagement, but it was the first time he'd faced 8 targets simultaneously with no backup. He thought about his father, who'd taught him that machining required respect for the tool and the material. Rush a cut, ruin the piece. Rush a shot, ruin everything. The Army had refined that instinct into doctrine, but it was his father's voice he heard now. Steady pressure, consistent motion. Let the tool do the work. Around him, the rest of the crew existed in their own isolated worlds. Martinez whispered prayers in Spanish. Jensen gripped the steering levers so hard his knuckles were white. Diaz breathed in short, shallow gasps. Only Kowalski remained perfectly calm, a statue in the commander's position. Rothwell drew strength from that calmness. If the lieutenant wasn't panicking, neither would he. The cold barrel doctrine was based on metallurgical reality. The Sherman's 76mm M1A2 gun was manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. When cold, the steel tube maintained perfect cylindrical dimensions. The rifling, the spiral grooves that spun the projectile, aligned precisely with the breech. But fire around, and everything changed. The explosion generated temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit for a fraction of a second. The barrel heated unevenly, hotter near the chamber, cooler toward the muzzle. This differential expansion, microscopic but measurable, altered the barrel's internal geometry. The first shot from a cold barrel followed a mathematically predictable trajectory. Subsequent shots wandered as heat accumulated. At ranges beyond 1,000 yards, this deviation could mean the difference between penetration and deflection. Rothwell understood this instinctively. His first shot would be his best shot. After that, he'd be fighting physics as much as the enemy. Kowalski had positioned the Sherman with ruthless calculation. The orchard sat on a slight rise, elevating their gun perhaps 15 feet above the road. This height advantage improved their penetration angle and gave Rothwell a clearer view of the Panzer's thinner top armor. The tree trunks provided physical protection and, more importantly, broke up the Sherman's distinctive silhouette. German commanders were trained to spot the Sherman's boxy profile instantly. Concealed among the trees, C7 became just another shadow. The road itself was the trap, straight for 800 yards, then curving behind a low rid. GE. Once the German column committed to that straight section, they'd have limited room to maneuver. The fields on either side were too soft for rapid movement. They'd be channeled, predictable. Kowalski's plan was simple. Let them enter the kill zone, destroy the lead, and rear vehicles to trap the column. then methodically eliminate everything between. It required perfect timing and absolute faith in Rothwell's gunnery. The German column commander, likely a veteran Hauptmann or major, had made decisions based on reasonable assumptions. His intelligence suggested American armor was still west of the Roer, engaged in crossing operations. These secondary roads should be clear. His 8 tanks represented a significant striking force, enough to disrupt enemy supply lines and perhaps recapture one of the contested river crossings. The Panzer IVs, though aging designs, still mounted capable 70mm guns. The 3 Panthers were formidable weapons, nearly invincible from the front. His crew quality varied. By February 1945, the Wehrmacht was fielding increasingly inexperienced tankers. The best had died in Russia or Normandy. These men had weeks of training, not years, but they were motivated by desperation. Germany was dying. Every kilometer of delay bought time for civilians to evacuate, for defenses to strengthen. The commander kept his formation loose, trading tactical cohesion for speed. He wanted to reach his objective before American fighter bombers appeared. That decision would cost him everything. Kowalski's leadership style was based on trust earned through shared survival. He'd learned early that micromanaging a gun crew got everyone killed. Each man had his role, his expertise. Kowalski's job was coordination and decision-making. He identified targets, assessed threats, chose engagement timing. Rothwell executed the gunnery. Martinez maintained fire rate. Jensen positioned the tank. Diaz provided local security. When Kowalski tapped Rothwell's shoulder twice, "Hold fire," it wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, backed by absolute confidence. Kowalski knew Rothwell wanted to fire. Every gunner's instinct screamed to shoot at maximum effective range, but Kowalski also knew that patience would multiply their effectiveness. 8 targets required 8 perfect shots, or as close as humanly possible. Starting too early meant alerting the enemy before achieving maximum damage. Kowalski was gambling his crew's lives on Rothwell's cold-barrel discipline. It was the kind of trust that couldn't be faked or ordered. It had to be built, shot by shot, through months of combat. The physics of tank versus tank combat came down to kinetic energy and armor thickness. The Sherman's 76mm M1A2 gun fired a 15-pound armor-piercing projectile at roughly 2,600 feet per second. At impact, that translated to enormous penetrating power, but only if the angle and distance were right. German armor used face-hardened steel, incredibly resistant to penetration, but vulnerable at specific angles and ranges. The Panzer IV's frontal armor was 80mm thick, sloped at 10 degrees. The Sherman's gun could defeat it reliably out to 1,500 yards. The Panther was a different beast. Its frontal glacis was 80mm sloped at 55 degrees, effectively 140mm of protection. Frontal shots were suicide. But the Panther's side armor was only 42 to 50mm, and the turret sides were even thinner. A flanking shot at 800 yards would punch through like paper. Rothwell had memorized these numbers at Fort Knox, but understanding them intellectually was different from applying them under fire. He needed to identify each target type instantly, calculate its vulnerable points, and adjust his aim point accordingly. The cold barrel gave him precision. His training gave him knowledge. Experience would determine if he lived to use both. 1,000 yards. The lead Panzer IV entered the kill zone. Rothwell centered his reticle on the junction where the turret met the hull, a weak point where armor plates joined. His breathing stopped. Kowalski's hand rested on his shoulder, ready to give the signal. 900 yards. The entire German column was now committed to the straight section of road. The lead tank passed a burned-out farmhouse that Kowalski had mentally marked as the firing point. 850 yards. Rothwell's finger moved inside the trigger guard. The traverse was perfect. The elevation was locked. Every mechanical element was aligned. 800 yards exactly. Kowalski squeezed Rothwell's shoulder. Fire. The 70 sinks. Two gun erupted. The concussion inside the turret was overwhelming. A physical blow that hammered eardrums and rattled teeth. Flame belched from the muzzle. The Sherman rocked backward on its suspension. Through the smoke and recoil, Rothwell kept his eye glued to the periscope. 1 second. 2 seconds. The M62 armor-piercing round covered 800 yards in less than a second and a half. It struck the lead Panzer IV precisely where Rothwell had aimed. The penetration was catastrophic. The shell punched through the side armor, detonated inside the fighting compartment, and ignited the ammunition storage. The Panzer IV exploded from within. The turret lifted off its ring and tumbled sideways into the ditch. Flame and black smoke erupted skyward. The commander, still standing in his cupola, was killed instantly. Rothwell was already traversing right. Martinez had the next round loaded before the first shell casing stopped rolling. "Up!" Martinez shouted. The German column was reacting. Turrets were traversing. Commanders were screaming into radios. But confusion reigned. Where had the shot come from? The 2nd Panzer IV, 50 yards behind the burning leader, was trying to reverse. Rothwell led the target slightly, accounting for its backward motion. He fired. The recoil felt different this time, sharper, more violent. The barrel was heating. The shot caught the Panzer IV in the front glacis at a steep angle. Not a perfect hit, but the kinetic energy was sufficient. The round didn't penetrate cleanly, but the shock wave fractured the armor plate. The Panzer IV shuddered, stopped moving, and began billowing white smoke. Crew bailout. 2 men tumbled from the hatches and ran for the ditches. The Panthers were moving now. The formation split. 1 Panther accelerated forward, trying to break past the ambush. Another turned left, attempting to maneuver into the muddy field and flank the hidden attacker. The third swung its massive gun toward the orchard, searching for targets. Rothwell ignored the Panther turning left. It would bog down in seconds. He focused on the one accelerating forward. Range, 700 yards, and closing fast. This was the critical shot. If that Panther escaped the kill zone, it could rally the survivors and coordinate a counterattack. Worse, it might reach a position where its superior gun could destroy the Sherman from range. "Panther, lead vehicle!" Kowalski's voice was clipped, urgent. Rothwell was already tracking it. The Panther was moving at perhaps 20 miles per hour, turret still traversing, searching. Rothwell aimed for the side armor behind the drive sprocket, a thinner section where the hull narrowed. He waited for the perfect moment, when the Panther's motion aligned with his traverse. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. Fire. The third shot was less accurate. The barrel's heat was affecting trajectory. The round struck low, hitting the Panther's track assembly instead of the hull. The track exploded in a cascade of sparks and shattered metal. The Panther slewed violently to the right, out of control, and crashed into the roadside embankment. Not destroyed, but immobilized. Good enough. Martinez was sweating, loading as fast as humanly possible. Jensen had the engine roaring now, ready to reposition if necessary. Diaz was screaming something about movement to the left, but Rothwell couldn't process it. His world had narrowed to the sight picture and the targets. The Panther that had turned left was indeed bogged down. its tracks spinning uselessly in the mud. The crew was bailing out, abandoning the tank. That left 5 targets, 2 more Panzer IVs, 1 operational Panther, and the command tank. The Panther was the threat. The operational Panther had identified their position. Its turret swung toward the orchard with terrifying speed. Rothwell saw the long 75mm gun barrel elevate slightly, hunting for the proper angle. He had perhaps 5 seconds before that gun fired, and when it did, the Sherman's frontal armor wouldn't stop it. "Panther, center mass!" Kowalski shouted, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Rothwell traversed left, fighting the mechanical resistance as adrenaline made his movements jerky. The Panther was positioned at an angle, presenting its frontal glacis, the worst possible shot. But Rothwell noticed something. The turret was fully traversed, exposing the thinner turret side armor. It was a tiny window, perhaps 18 inches wide. At 750 yards, with a heating barrel, it should have been impossible. Rothwell fired anyway. The 4th shot felt wild, uncontrolled. The recoil seemed more violent. Smoke filled the turret. Martinez was already loading the 5th round, his hands moving with mechanical precision despite the chaos. Through the smoke, Rothwell saw the impossible. The round had struck the Panther's turret ring, the junction between turret and hull. It was pure luck, or divine intervention, or the last gasp of cold barrel accuracy. The shell penetrated the thin armor at the ring and detonated inside the turret basket. The Panther didn't explode dramatically. It simply stopped. Smoke poured from every hatch. The gun barrel drooped slightly as hydraulic pressure failed. No one bailed out. No one would. 3 targets remained. 2 Panzer IVs were attempting to reverse back down the road, trying to escape the kill zone. The command tank, recognizable by its radio antenna array, was stationary, probably trying to coordinate with higher command or call for support. Kowalski made the tactical decision instantly. "Command tank, then the runners." Rothwell shifted to the command tank. It was the furthest target now, perhaps 900 yards, partially obscured by the smoke from burning vehicles. The barrel was definitely hot now. Each shot would be increasingly unpredictable. But Martinez kept loading, and Rothwell kept firing. The 5th shot missed completely, sailing over the command tank and striking the hillside beyond. Rothwell cursed, made a minute elevation adjustment, and fired again as soon as Martinez shouted, "Up!" The 6th shot struck the command tank's engine deck. Not a killing blow, but the tank caught fire immediately. Diesel fuel ignited, sending orange flames and black smoke billowing. The crew evacuated through every available hatch, tumbling onto the road and scattering into the fields. The 2 Panzer IVs were in full retreat now, reversing at maximum speed. One was nearly out of effective range, cresting the low ridge where the road curved. The other was closer, perhaps 850 yards, but moving erratically as the driver fought to avoid the burning wrecks and stay on the solid roadway. Rothwell tracked the closer one. His hands were trembling now, exhaustion and adrenaline catching up. The 7th shot caught the Panzer IV in the rear engine compartment as it reversed past a burning hulk. The thinner rear armor offered no resistance. The engine exploded, and the tank lurched to a halt, flames erupting from the engine grills. The last Panzer IV was cresting the ridge, almost to safety. 1,050 yards, maximum effective range, with a barrel that was glowing hot inside the breech. Kowalski's voice was calm. "Last shot. Make it count." Rothwell centered the reticle, led the target generously to account for its reverse motion, and elevated slightly to compensate for the barrel's heat expansion. He squeezed the trigger. The 8th shot was the worst of all mechanically. The recoil felt sloppy, the sound different. But somehow, against all probability and physics, the round arced through the cold morning air and struck the retreating Panzer IV in its thin rear turret armor. The tank stopped immediately. After a 5-second delay, the turret hatches flew open and crew members emerged, hands raised in surrender. The firing had lasted 97 seconds. 8 targets engaged. 8 targets neutralized. 6 destroyed or burning. 1 immobilized. 1 surrendered. The cold barrel's advantage had lasted perhaps 3 shots. Rothwell's skill and increasingly desperate calculations had carried the rest. His ears were ringing so badly he couldn't hear Martinez cheering or Kowalski reporting their success on the radio. He simply stared through the periscope at the road, now littered with 8 smoking German tanks, and tried to process what had just happened. His hands finally started shaking uncontrollably. The silence after the gun stopped was more deafening than the firing had been. Rothwell slumped back from the periscope, his face gray with exhaustion. The turret was thick with cordite smoke that burned eyes and throat. Martinez opened the turret hatch to vent the fumes, and cold February air rushed in like a blessing. Kowalski remained in his commander's position, binoculars raised, scanning for additional threats. His voice over the intercom was measured, professional. "Driver, hold position. On, loader, secure ammunition. Gunner, stand by." Standard post-engagement protocol, as if they'd just completed a training exercise rather than destroying an entire German armored column. But the crew knew differently. Jensen was weeping silently in the driver's compartment, relief and shock overwhelming his composure. Diaz was vomiting into an empty shell casing. Martinez kissed his rosary beads and whispered rapid prayers of thanksgiving. Rothwell just stared at his hands, watching them tremble, unable to make them stop. The physical toll of maintaining perfect stillness for so long, then executing 8 precise shots in 97 seconds, had pushed his nervous system beyond its limits. Kowalski climbed down from his position and squeezed Rothwell's shoulder. Not a tactical signal this time, but simple human acknowledgement. "You just saved our lives," the lieutenant said quietly. "All of us." Company headquarters responded to Kowalski's radio report with disbelief. Captain Morrison himself came on the net, demanding confirmation. 8 enemy tanks destroyed by a single Sherman? Impossible. Kowalski repeated the report calmly, adding that visual confirmation was available. The burning wrecks were clearly visible from their position. Morrison ordered them to hold in place, while he sent a reconnaissance team forward to verify and assess. Within 20 minutes, a jeep with a reconnaissance sergeant and a photographer arrived. The sergeant counted the wrecks carefully, examined them through binoculars, and radioed back confirmation. 6 panzers destroyed and burning beyond recovery. 1 immobilized with track damage. 1 surrendered with its crew, captured by infantry that had moved up from the south. The photographer documented everything methodically. He took shots of each destroyed tank from multiple angles, capturing tactical numbers and unit markings visible on the hull. Else, the 2 lead. Panzer IVs were completely destroyed, their turrets blown off by catastrophic ammunition explosions. The first Panther was burning steadily, reduced to a blackened skeleton. The second Panther, struck in the turret ring, was relatively intact externally, but clearly combat-killed. The third Panther sat abandoned in the muddy field, its tracks buried to the hubs. The command tank was still burning, ammunition cooking off occasionally with sharp cracks. The 7th Panzer IV was a smoking ruin. The 8th sat silent on the ridge, its white surrender flag visible on the radio antenna. The reconnaissance team also documented something else. German return fire had been minimal and ineffective. Only the operational Panther had gotten a shot off, and it had missed, the round striking a tree 50 yards from the Sherman's position. The speed and precision of Rothwell's shooting had created such shock and confusion that coordinated German response had been impossible. This detail would prove significant in post-battle analysis. The ability of a single, well-positioned tank with a disciplined crew to neutralize a superior force through tactical surprise and gunnery excellence became a case study that filtered through armored command. By mid-afternoon, senior officers arrived to inspect the battlefield personally. Colonel John Wellborn, commanding the 33rd Armored Regiment, walked the road with his operations officer, examining each destroyed vehicle. He interviewed the German prisoners, 19 men total from the 8 tanks. Their testimony was consistent. The ambush had been perfectly executed. They'd seen no warning signs, no preparation indicators. The first shot had come without preamble, and subsequent shots had followed with shocking rapidity and accuracy. Several prisoners mentioned the precision specifically, noting that almost every round had struck vulnerable points, ratam, then bouncing off frontal armor. One Panzer IV commander, wounded but coherent, stated through an interpreter that he'd initially believed they were being engaged by multiple American tanks, not a single gun. Colonel Wellborn sought out Rothwell personally. The young corporal was sitting on the Sherman's fender, smoking a cigarette with hands that still trembled slightly. Wellborn asked him to walk through the engagement shot by shot. Rothwell did so, his voice quiet and factual, describing ranges, target selection, and aiming points. When he mentioned the cold barrel doctrine and why he'd waited for 800 yards, Wellborn exchanged glances with his operations officer. "That's exactly what they taught you at Knox?" Wellborn asked. Rothwell nodded. "Yes, sir. First shot from a cold barrel is your best shot. I wanted to make it count." Wellborn smiled thinly. "Corporal, you made 8 shots count. That's exceptional gunnery under any circumstances." The immediate tactical impact was significant. The destroyed German column had been heading toward the 47th Infantry Regiment's exposed flank. Had those 8 panzers reached their objective, they could have disrupted the entire divisional advance, possibly forcing a costly withdrawal from hard-won river crossings. Instead, the threat was eliminated without American infantry casualties. The 3rd Armored Division's advance continued on schedule. Within 3 days, American forces had established bridgeheads across the Rhine itself. The strategic timetable held. Rothwell received the Silver Star for his actions on February 23rd. The citation specifically mentioned extraordinary precision and cool discipline under fire, and destroying 8 enemy armored vehicles in a single engagement. Kowalski received the Bronze Star for tactical leadership. The entire crew received commendations, but recognition was almost irrelevant to the men involved. They'd survived. That was the only medal that truly mattered. Rothwell would go on to fight through the final weeks of the war, participating in the advance into central Germany. He survived the war and returned to Pittsburgh, where he worked in precision manufacturing for 40 years. He rarely spoke about February 23rd, except occasionally to other veterans who understood the specific terror and exhilaration of armored combat. The engagement entered official U.S. Army Armor Doctrine as Case Study 17B in the post-war analysis of tank tactics. Gunnery instructors at Fort Knox used Rothwell's engagement to illustrate several principles: the value of cold barrel discipline, the importance of target selection and patience, the effectiveness of ambush positioning over frontal assault, and the multiplication of force through precision rather than volume. The specific detail about waiting for ideal range rather than firing at maximum effective range became standard teaching. Generations of American tank gunners learned about the Pittsburgh corporal who destroyed 8 Panzers in 97 seconds because he understood that perfect patience created perfect opportunities. The Sherman that fought that day, C-7, survived the war. It was photographed multiple times in subsequent weeks, with tactical markings added to denote its 8 kills, small German cross symbols painted on the gun tube, a practice common among successful tank crews. After the war, it was shipped back to the United States and eventually scrapped, as were thousands of Shermans. No physical memorial exists except in photographs and official records. But the lesson endures in every armored warfare manual that emphasizes discipline over aggression, precision over firepower. War reduces complexity to singular moments of choice. For Rothwell, that moment was the decision to hold fire when every instinct screamed to shoot. It was the discipline to trust his training, his commander, and the physics of cold steel over the chaos of fear. 8 German tanks represented 8 crews, young men like himself, fighting for a cause already lost, unaware that their road home led through an orchard, where patience had become a weapon more devastating than armor or firepower. The cold barrel was merely metal and mathematics. What mattered was the human will to master both under unimaginable pressure. The paradox of mechanized warfare is that machines magnify human qualities rather than replace them. The Sherman was no mechanical marvel. It was outgunned, out-armored, and outnumbered by superior German designs. But inside that steel coffin sat 5 men who'd learned to function as a single organism, thinking, reacting, executing with collective precision that transformed industrial adequacy into tactical excellence. Rothwell's gunnery was exceptional, but it was meaningless without Martinez's loading speed, Jensen's positioning, Diaz's security, and Kowalski's leadership. The cold barrel doctrine provided the foundation. The crew provided the will. Modern armor warfare has evolved beyond recognition. Computerized fire control, thermal imaging, guided munitions. Technology has automated much of what Rothwell calculated by eye and instinct. Yet, the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Discipline under fire, patience under pressure, and the courage to wait for the perfect shot, rather than settle for the immediate one, these qualities cannot be programmed or automated. They must be trained, tested, and proven in the crucible of actual combat. Rothwell's engagement on a cold February morning in 1945 stands as testament to a simple truth. In war, as in all things, precision and patience will always triumph over panic and haste. The cold barrel was just steel. The discipline was everything.